And now here's Dan Wooding with today's guest.
Welcome to today's program, and we are going to have a fascinating journey in the music business with Brian Gentry. And Brian is here in Orange County at the moment to do a concert at the Upper Room. So first of all, Brian, thanks for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Dan. It's a pleasure.
Now, I gather from that accent, Brian, that you're not originally from Orange County.
No.
Tell us a little bit about your early life, and then we're going to go into more of your music career, particularly
Sure.
with Dan Peake.
Well, I was born and raised in Kentucky, about 2 hours outside of Nashville, and I actually grew up in the radio business. My father was a broadcaster, and it was a small market radio station in Kentucky, served Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, and Illinois, Southern Illinois. And so I grew up in the radio business, and I guess as I got a little bit older, I got really intrigued with music. I had an eye injury. I was just like a typical kid that grew up into sports, but I was a little guy, so I wanted to play football, but I was too small. So, and what occurred was I had an eye injury. I was struck with an egg on a Halloween night when I was just a young lad, like 14 years old. And that kind of put a hold on my illustrious football career. And so at that point in time, I decided, well, I'll take up guitar. And being in the radio business, my father, I was into music, always digging through the albums in the production library. And that's how I got started in music. And that's kind of how it all began with me learning.
Now, tell you about your dad. Was it a secular station, a music Christian station, or what?
It was a secular station. It was mainly small market radio. It was right before. It was in the 70s. It was right before the FM radio. The birth of FM. FM was on the air, but it had not really taken off yet. So it was an AM station that was really typical. Local community news, sports, weather, who died, that type of thing. But he did program just pop music or top 40.
And did you go on behind the mic as well?
I did eventually. When it first all began, I was a little too young to get behind the microphone. But I've done everything from dump the trash and clean the fluorescent lights to give the weather forecast.
So you were raised in this exciting period of music then, with the Beatles and people like that. Who were some of your early favorites?
Well, it's funny because I was just a little bit past the Beatles, although later I became a huge Beatles fan. But I was in the era of California rock, which was what mainly influenced me once I began to play and sing and actually write. I was drawn to the writers. And Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, primarily California rockers like the Eagles, Poco, certainly America, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Wow. Now, in those early days, did you have any Christian connections at all?
I was raised in the United Methodist Church, and my father, believe it or not, during that time had a true conversion of sorts, an awakening, what have you, and he just kind of went from a casual Christian to one who I would consider as being a man of faith and studying the Word and going to speaking events and whatnot.
Okay. So was it his influence that you eventually became a believer?
He was definitely an influence on my life during that period of time because, like I said, I was into California rock and then I began to experiment recreationally with drugs. I was just a typical pot smoking teenage son, and then my dad, begins to kind of share the gospel with me, and I didn't want to hear that at the time.
So walk us through what exactly happened. You were obviously rebellious. Would you have fights with him?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would more or less just say, don't go there with me. I was resistant. And my mother kind of was too. She wasn't quite sure what to do with Dad's faith tapes and, watching Pat Robertson and so forth. We were kind of like, oh no, when he would pull out, he would leave little tracts or books along the staircase for me to, take to the bathroom with me or whatever. So, but he was planting the seed, and that was good. And but yeah, later in life, I was playing in a little acoustic band, and I had my own experience. It was actually my senior year in high school.
Tell us what happened there.
Well, it was really something. I went back to playing football. I always joke and say I was what they call a frock, which was half freak, half jock. And, but I was smoking pot and drinking on the weekends and playing football and music.
Yeah.
And I had a real experience in the middle of a football game where I believe it or not, was hit real hard in a play. I was running back a kickoff. And to this day, I can't explain what happened. I don't know if it was a concussion or just exactly what happened to me physically, but spiritually, something changed in me, and I felt like I had an encounter with the Lord. And a lot of people to this day say that, Gentry saw God on the football field. And to this day, I can't explain what happened to me except that right after that occurred, God's invisible hand brought a person into my life who moved in the neighborhood and was a on-fire Christian, and he started knocking on our practice room door at my dad's house, and the room would be filled with, pot smoke, and we'd try to fumigate the room, and in would walk this Jesus freak, and he would start talking to us about, the scriptures and that Jesus was not just a historic figure and so forth.
Yeah.
And at that point, in so many words, I guess he kind of discipled me and was there right when I needed it.
Wow. What was the name of the band that you had then?
Well, it sounded more like a law firm than a band because we were following in the footsteps of Crosby, Stills, Nash, Young, Morgan, Finkelstein, whatever. So we just went by our last names.
Yeah, which
was Gentry, Marvin, Kurtzinger at the time.
Yeah, it does sound like a law firm.
It was more of a law firm sound.
And the type of music you were doing then?
Was total folk rock.
Yeah.
With the harmony-laden, acoustic-based music.
Yeah. So he came into the room. He didn't pass out through the marijuana smoke or anything. Did he actually preach at you or what?
No, not at all. He just loved on us. He was very relational. If he would have come in poking us with the Bible like it was a loaded gun, we would have revolted, and God knows what we would have done to him. He loved us. He just loved on us and kept coming back, kept loving us some more, and eventually that's what drew us in.
Wow. Was it the whole band or just you?
Actually, it was me first. Then my partner, Ken Marvin, music partner, came around a little bit after that, and he also had an awakening. And then the other gentleman went on to other endeavors, but the two of us then formed a duo, and later that's when we met Dan Peake and got into Christian music after that.
Just coming back to that, what was the guy's name?
Steve Sims.
Okay. Are you still in contact with him?
It's funny you would ask. Steve is, after a number of years that we kind of went our separate ways, recently, in the last 6 years, he began an inner city Nashville church that is affiliated with the Salvation Army. He's what they call an auxiliary captain. He and his wife began this move in East Nashville, and I still, and we have since been, reconnected and reunited, whatever the proper word would be, and I help him with some worship there and reaching out to people in inner city Nashville.
We're speaking with Brian Gentry, and we're going to now move into the time he worked with Dan Peake. Now, for those who don't know who Dan Peake was, let's have a little picture of America, the band he was with, and then let's talk a little bit about how you met him and what happened.
Sure. Well, the first time I met Dan Peek was, I guess, at my very first concert when I was 14 years old, because we went to hear America perform at Murray State University. And my wife and I were sweethearts.
That's disgusting.
It is disgusting. And her brother and his girlfriend, they were old enough to drive, and they took us to the university, and that's where we heard America. So I guess that would be the first time that I met Dan. And
what was their number one hit?
Oh, they had a number of great hits, but A Horse with No Name is what put them on the map worldwide. It was a number one all across the world. And then they had numerous follow-up songs: Ventura Highway, Tin Man, Lonely People, Don't Cross the River, and so on.
So you meet Dan Peek, and does he hear you play, or what?
Well, no, we heard him. That was when I was young. But then I also met him once. He did a concert at where I was going to in university at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green, Kentucky. He did a show there, and I actually walked out in the hall, and he had finished the show, and we met, which, I always thought was kind of strange, because I didn't anticipate he'd be walking out in this particular hallway. Mm-hmm. And we actually, did a meet and greet there. But what happened was, we had been in Nashville back in the good old days when you could actually walk into a record label when they, would solicit talent and music, and we were submitting things on Music Row, and we met a gentleman who went on to become affiliated with Benson Records, and Dan had left the group, America, and he had a spiritual awakening. He had met Jesus, and it changed his life, and he no longer was doing the drugs and alcohol thing, and they parted ways, and he linked up actually here on the West Coast, if I'm not mistaken, with Pat Boone had a label called Lamb and Lion, and Dan ended up cutting his record, his first Christian record here. And that's when contemporary Christian music was just emerging on the scene with Amy Grant, and B.J. Thomas did a Christian record, and it was a whole new genre that had really just begun, where believers were able to do contemporary music with a message. And so Dan had then become based out of Nashville, and then we hooked up in Nashville through this record producer, record company executive. He actually is the one, who got us linked up with Dan's engineer. We went to lunch, and the next thing you know, we're working with him. And then the next.
When you say we, is that you individually, or the you and your colleague? It would be
the duo Marvin and Gentry. Yeah. It was Ken and I had been pitching ourselves as a Simon and Garfunkel type group, and then we met Dan, and he immediately liked what he heard, because we reminded him of kind of his style, and he ended up recording a song that we wrote called "I Will Not Be Silent," and it went on to make his greatest hits. Wow. And
what was that about? What was the lyrics about?
The lyrics in "I Will Not Be Silent" were more that the battle has been won. Yeah. And that, it's not really so much about what we're doing, it's about what God has done, and trumpeting that.
So Dan Peek was this sort of legendary. I mean, this band was one of the world's most famous bands. Yeah. Did you actually make some albums with him, with both of you singing? Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. That was just the early days, when we met Dan. And America was, in the world's eyes, extremely famous. George Martin produced the Beatles in America, and they, at that time, Dan's whole testimony was pretty much, I've had everything that the world has to offer. Yeah. I've had it all, and I was still just empty, hollow. And so that was a great part of his testimony, whenever he did speak and share and go out. I've had everything that a worldly person can obtain, and I was still empty. Huh. It's kind of like what does it profit a man to gain the whole world?
Yeah.
And you know, so anyway, we began to work together. He really liked us. He had done a solo run after he left America.
Mm-hmm.
If you go in and read on he has his last interview posted on our website, which is marvinandgentry.com. Yeah. Also, you can see it at danpeak.com. And his brother, who is incidentally from Oxford, England, still runs his website.
Oh, wow.
And he explains how having all of that success, then going solo, doing the Christian thing for a while. Then when he met us, we kind of met a void in his life because he missed the camaraderie in the studio. He'd put together a couple of bands when he toured, but as far as the creative, we filled that void.
So what was your name then with this new band?
He dubbed us the name Peace.
Right.
And so we'd gone from Marvin and Gentry. We ended up signing a record deal with Milk and Honey Records after we had written that song for him, a couple of songs for him. That was somewhat of a catalyst for us to go ahead and get, we were signed after that. Mm-hmm. And then we had Milk and Honey Records pitching us as the duo Marvin and Gentry. So then when we ended up doing the independent thing on Dan's own private label as Peace, we have kind of like two audiences out there. We have the Marvin and Gentry audience where people bought our first record and heard us on Christian radio. And then we have the audience that Dan tried to build, which was really a pop thing. Yeah. It started out as a pop thing. And we were kind of disgruntled with, a lot of things that were going on in Christian music at the time, along with a whole host of other people who were that was the era where they were all going crossover, like Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith. They were all trying to get pop records out the door.
And so you were getting worried, this is just a big business now.
Totally. And, for me, my expectations were completely out of control when I went into Christian music. I was seeing other artists, even on our label, that were really, successful, and it was somewhat lucrative for certain artists. So your expectations are, you shift. There's a shifting that goes on. You go from just having this heart to want to minister to people and share the love of God to dollar signs in your eyes, or stars in your eyes. It depends. Some have stars in their eyes, some have dollar signs in their eyes. Both, right? And some have both. And so my motives, began to shift. I began to want, worldly success, along with what we were doing, and in that particular time, that's kind of when I went through a really dark period in my own faith and life.
Tell us about that.
Well, my first marriage ended. My first wife, who also had similar expectations, when those expectations were not met. I've heard the old saying, expectations are just resentments doing exercises. And, when the expectations aren't met, there are a lot of broken hearts probably here in Hollywood and Los Angeles, the same as in Nashville. People come to town wanting to make it big, and that's kind of the way it goes. And then when they don't make it big, there are broken relationships, broken hearts.
Yeah. So you were going through this very dark period. Tell us about it.
Okay. So expectations were not met. There were a lot of, as I said, broken hearts. I went through a divorce. During that divorce, I had 2 small children who were, very much my world. And so when that occurred to me, I was in so much pain through it, feeling like a failure because I wasn't, a number 1 selling artist, perhaps, or whatever whatever is going on between, the voices in my head at that time, and then suddenly the impact of a divorce. I went back to the alcohol primarily. So, some drugs were recreationally used, but primarily alcohol was I went back to the bottle to kill the pain. And I joke about it sometimes now because I've been sober for 13 years. But when I went through it, I was in so much pain that sometimes I think that I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had the alcohol.
How much were you drinking every day?
Well, I didn't start out necessarily drinking like an alcoholic, but it progressed. Yeah. It progressed.
And what was the turning point that brought this to a head?
I hit rock bottom. I lost everything. My father had been in broadcasting. I had a radio station that I was affiliated with and kind of running for him and beefing up, as they say, and a business. Yeah. And that went south. I ended up seeking out my old girlfriend, who has now been my wife for 14 years. And because I was just at a total bottom, I didn't have any place really to seem like at that time to turn. Yeah. And that's where God once again led me. And I was at that point able to really face the music eventually, not right at first, but. Yeah.
So how did it all turn around for you?
Well, at that particular time, there were just dark things that were going on. I think I read once where Charles Spurgeon called it dark providence. Yeah. Where we reach a point, most people like to sugarcoat, or better told, maybe better said would be to appear on the outside as if they've got their life together. Yeah. That everything is just, organized and we're doing good over here, folks. But on the inside, they're dishonest. Yeah. And they're not really at peace with themselves, nor with their fellow man or with God. And I was at that place where I was not at peace with myself. I had done a tremendous amount of damage to other people's lives because of my drinking and because of my madness that I was going through. So when I finally hit rock bottom, I cried out to God, and I asked Him to, give me another chance, to help me. And I had very many frothy emotional appeals to God in the past, but this time I really meant it. I meant it in my heart, and I was willing to do whatever it took to come out of this pit.
So what did you go through rehab or something?
I bounced in and out of some places. I did do an outpatient program at a hospital just to get on my feet again. Yeah. And then, it was as if God surrounded me with some really good people during that period of time. I ended up marrying my hometown sweetheart, and she was a godsend, a guardian angel or whatever. And
do you have contact with your kids from the first marriage?
That is another miracle that happened. After I got sober, I got back into radio again, where I had originally been, and my son moved to live with me through his high school years. My oldest daughter and I are close. Yeah. I've been able to repair as much of the damage as I could, and we're all very close today. And I have 2 children with my wife, Melissa.
That's wonderful. Well, we've been speaking with Brian Gentry. We've covered an awful lot of ground, but Brian, again, what's the main website for people to get information on what you do?
Marvin and spelled out A-N-D Gentry.com. You can read all about the solo record that I'm now producing or promoting, and also you can look at danpeak.com.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.